The Florida Panthers are back in action at Amerant Bank Arena and welcome in a very desperate Nashville Predators team.
You're Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into this Thursday, November 7th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez from the Hockey News. You can follow me on X at MondoMan12. Follow the show account on X and Instagram at LO_FLA Panthers. And shout out to the everydayers who come back here and get your daily Florida Panthers fix. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So, Florida Panther fans, grateful to be back here on another edition of the show as we finally have a game to talk about for the Florida Panthers, as there has been a break in between their New York trip to Finland and then the Finland trip to back home for the Florida Panthers, as they will play 9 of their next 12 at Amerant Bank Arena. But joining me on today's edition of the show to preview tonight's game between the Florida Panthers and the Nashville Predators, she is from the Hockey News, host of the Wraparound, and also one of the co-hosts of Locked On Predators. She is Emma Lingan. Emma, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining. So I want to discuss more of, because the offseason conversation for basically the NHL of the team that at least got the most attention has been the Nashville Predators this past offseason, obviously with everything that they bought based on free agents and everything for them. But I mean, when you think about everything prior to that, where, as we spoke in our pre-production meeting, based on just a few years ago, where David Poile retires after accumulating a lot of draft assets. I mean, I remember there was that trade in the final round of the draft a few years ago with Tom Fitzgerald, former Panther, and David Poile, former Predator, former captain as well. And then all the accumulation of draft capital with the Tanner Jeannot trade there. And then all of a sudden, free agency came, they bought. After that, you're thinking Steven Stamkos, Jonathan Marchessault, Brady Skjei, but then off to this 4-1, 8-1 start for them. I want to get like your initial reaction to the moves, and was there maybe a little bit of confusion there for you, or was it a time for Predators fans to be really, really hyped about this? I want to get your take on that.
Well, I think the most important message that the offseason moves sent to Predators fans is that this team actually has a direction now. Like you said, it was looking like, oh, are we headed towards a rebuild? Well, no, maybe not, because we still have Josi and Forsberg, and we're not going to rebuild while we have those guys. And we're not going to tank, but we're also not contenders. So what are we? We're just kind of in this mushy middle. And Barry Trotz came in and said, this is our direction. This is what we're trying to do. We're trying to win. And so I think that sent a really important message to the rest of the team, put the rest of the league on notice, and it sent a message to the fans as well. And I think actually the biggest move, and ironically, this is the one that doesn't get talked about as much because it's not as maybe big and shiny as Stamkos and Marchessault, but the move that really kicked off that entire crazy offseason was signing UC Saros to that contract extension, because my personal opinion is you don't get Stamkos, Marchessault, Skjei without UC Saros. I think that had to be in place. So I think that was really kind of the maybe more under the radar kickoff to that whole thing. But as far as the start, 4-8-1, like you said, it's been frustrating to watch, frustrating to cover. I talked to the players, they're visibly frustrated. But one thing that Barry Trotz and Andrew Brunette And, myself and my co-host Ann Kimmel on Locked On Predators, we've been preaching this for months. It feels like this is going to require some patience. Just because your team is good on paper doesn't mean they're going to be good right away. And these are guys, I think that, a lot of the fans are starting to panic a little bit because, oh my gosh, 4-8-1, this is terrible. I mean, at this point last year, they were 5-8. They weren't, it's really not that different. And so I think it's just different because the expectations are higher this year, but it's going to take some patience. But as I've been saying for the last couple weeks, this team is too good to be this bad, to be as bad as their record reflects. And so I think it's just one of those things that it's going to take some time for these guys to really mesh together, play together as a 5-man unit. But you're starting to see flashes of it. It's just, a little bit frustrating. It's got to get worse before it gets better sometimes.
Yeah, and for the Florida Panthers side of things, I remember when they first traded for Matthew Tkachuk, brought in Paul Maurice. It took a little bit to get them together. A lot of the conversation for the Panthers in that season in 2023, I'm talking about, was really the Paul Maurice rant on the bench in Toronto during the middle of a review. I remember, but nobody really talks about the very first rant that he went on back in November when it was a home game against the Seattle Kraken, a second end of a back-to-back. Their game prior to that was a game in Tampa where Zach Dalpe was the only one to get on the score sheet for the Panthers there in that game. So that was a rough stretch of a back-to-back. I mean, with the Predators also being on the second end of a back-to-back with Scott Wedgwood projected to be, at least it looks like that he'll be in net for the Predators tonight. But also, I mean, a lot of talent, and also they're also getting used to a new coaching style as well for Andrew Brunette. I mean, not the most experienced guy. I mean, he got a little bit of that in Florida, learned under Lindy Ruff in New Jersey there, and now getting 2 years, second year under his belt in Nashville there. And also when you think about star power there at with Steven Stamkos, who recently had his return in Tampa, Jonathan Marchessault, who was maybe not so happy about his exit with the Vegas Golden Knights, but at the same time for Vegas, it's business for them. They're not afraid to let go of guys in order to keep their championship window in, with guys who are maybe filtering out guys who are like approaching 30. And this for the Nashville Predators, from what I'm seeing, is also veteran guys there to teach a little bit of the younger guys, with like a Luke Evangeliska, Tomasino, Leroux. I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly there, but also that I think that's also what Barry Trotz is trying to do. How do you process that?
Yeah, I think what's important about, the way that Barry went about adding these pieces in free agency over the offseason is that he really didn't leverage the team's future to get those pieces that are going to help them in the present. They still have a ton of draft capital. I think they have
9 of them next
yeah.
year.
Yes, 9. And I think that they had 12 last year. So it's, they've still got the draft capital. They've got a stacked system in Milwaukee in the AHL. They've, gone to the Western Conference final in the Calder Cup playoffs 2 years in a row. Like, they've got a really talented team down there too, with pieces that are maybe not quite NHL ready yet. And that doesn't mean they'll never be. And I think that was kind of, again, I go back to where this team was kind of in the mushy middle, where it was like, okay, so why don't we just bring up these kids and see what they can do if we're not trying to win right now? And then, Barry Trotz signed these key pieces sort of as like, I see it almost as a stopgap between, because the last thing you want to do is bring up young players before they're ready. And that's not good for the player. It's not good for the team, not good for anyone. So I think that these guys, they kind of come in and they bridge the gap between the present and the future. And then these younger guys, like you mentioned, the Zach Leroux, the Tomasinos, the Evangelistas, they come in, they learn from, I mean, what better kind of guys to learn from than Steven Stamkos, Roman Josi, Philip Forsberg, Ryan O'Reilly, and then they kind of usher in the next generation, and it sets them up for sustain success over a long period of time. It's not, and that's the thing where I think, again, I go back to the 4-8-1 start. It's really, this was not a do or die year for the Predators. They have a window. This is just the very opening of their window. It's the very beginning. And so I know the expectations are higher, but I think, it's a good point that you bring up that this is not, their window doesn't slam shut at the end of this year, or even the end of next year. They're set up for success for a long period of time.
Yeah, and for them, their ability to still develop guys like Yaroslav Askarov and still trade him to get a piece back in order to maybe flip something in order to bring an NHL ready player next year is while the team is already starting to get a little bit of chemistry together in this 1 year where there is going to be a little bit of growing pains there. But we're going to transition over to segment number 2 where we're going to discuss more about the center depth for the Nashville Predators and more about the special teams for the Predators. That's actually looking really good for them at this moment in time. We're going to discuss that more next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. And the Game Time curation makes it easier to save more on sports, comedy, theater, and more. And the all-in pricing for Game Time, you toggle this feature and it shows the total upfront with no surprise fees at checkout. And the seat views, you get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. And the lowest price guarantee or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Game Time ticket coverage, your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. And take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON NHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time. Also, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to take on the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL, all in one place. When you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you can place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Segment number 2 here on this Thursday, November 7th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. Joined by Emma Lingan of the Hockey News, host of the Wraparound and co-host of Locked On Predators. So the biggest conversation for the Nashville Predators, I remember just when this team was first put together. I mean, still for them, special teams has been outstanding. I mean, I watched the end of their game last night against the Washington Capitals. 6 for 6 on the PK is the stat I saw, and I saw a little bit of their game on Monday, and I saw how much they fought for each other after some brutal hits from the LA Kings there. So I was seeing how, and I saw Ryan O'Reilly even talking about how it was the worst game that he's played in a while for him. So also whenever I think about just veteran presence and also ability to just drive play for the Nashville Predators, I mean, the one conversation has been skilled wingers for the Nashville Predators, but a little bit tough with the forward as far as driving play. I mean, they're winning their faceoffs. I mean, but as far as high activity play for the Nashville Predators, I'm also seeing that Tommy Novak's day-to-day, Colton Sissons has been up and down in the lineup. There's been a lot of line shuffles from what I've seen. I've seen, according to Money Puck, that only one line has played more than 50 minutes together. So that's a little bit, so I'm seeing a little bit of trying to figure something out there for Nashville. How are you seeing the line juggles for what the Nashville Predators are putting together?
Yeah, it's definitely been a juggling act here. I think that, and that's to be expected early in the year while, they're just trying to find what combinations fit with each other. And when you bring in these new pieces, they're not just new players. I mean, these are guys that you build a system around. So you need to make sure that everyone's in the right position that's going to set them up to be successful. It was an issue, I think, earlier in the year, in the first few games. Andrew Brunette started making, I would say, maybe a few too many line changes within games. And that was kind of creating sort of this panic look on this team. And guys were looking like they've never played together before because they hadn't. And so it was a little chaotic. I think a big part of that, though, like part of the root of that is Nashville does not have a number 2 center. And Barry Trotz has acknowledged that. They signed Tommy Novak to his contract extension last year, kind of in the hopes that he would become that for them. I don't know, at least early on, I don't know if he's the guy. He's a very skilled player, but I think he's more of a number 3 center. But then you have Colton Sissons as well, who really profiles as a number 3 center too, but he's a veteran guy, really strong two-way player, so he can play anywhere throughout the lineup. Kind of a Swiss Army knife kind of guy, so it's what you're going to get from him. This team knows they don't have a number 2 center, and they also know no one is trading right now, and they also know how what a hot commodity 2Cs are right now, because they're not the only team that needs one. And so they're trying desperately to find the answer to this problem with what they already have. And I think that's kind of why we're seeing all these different line combinations. Of course, doesn't help. Like you mentioned, Tommy Novak day to day, he actually took some friendly fire, took a shoulder, Colton Sissons' shoulder hit him in the face during the game the other night. And then during the Capitals game, like you mentioned, Colton Sissons actually left in the first minute of the second period, did not return. Still no update on him, but looked like he blocked a shot with his wrist. So looked like he was in some pain. So we will see. They've got some guys who can play center, like Mike McCarron, Mark Jankowski, Juuso Parssinen. They might play better on the wing, but they can play center if they're called upon to do that. So it's kind of that number 2 center piece that's like the very glaring need for them. But I think that it's a balancing act, and they're still trying to find that balance of like, okay, let's find what works, but let's not panic the minute something doesn't work and start changing everything.
Yeah, another part of the lineup that I want to talk about is the defense for the Nashville Predators. Looking at their 5-on-5 numbers, minus 19 at this moment in time through 13 games, seeing that the high danger chances are at a really high rate. I mean, big signing was Brady Skjei. I mean, I didn't know how to look at Carolina after how much they lost for their decor. I mean, the bill comes due eventually for a lot of teams. I mean, the Panthers are going to have to deal with that very soon, even though there's still questions on whether they're going to re-sign someone like Sam Bennett, even though conversations have happened, which, crazy enough, Frank Saravelli also spoke about how number 2 centers are something really looked after. I mean, that's why people are monitoring Florida and Sam Bennett at this moment in time on what's going to happen there, but also for the defense there for the Nashville Predators. A little bit of continuity with the exception of Skjei coming into the mix. Luke Schenn just recently had game number 1,000 recently for them, but also the high danger chances there. So I want to get a little bit of your take on just how much the protection around the net for Nashville there.
Yeah, I would say defensively, this team still has quite a bit of work to do. I think it's part of it is learning the system. Brady Skjei is coming from a Carolina system that is very heavily man-to-man, and that is, pretty self-explanatory. But then you come into an Andrew Brunette system in Nashville that's, it's a lot more proactive than reactive. You're not just kind of guarding the net, you're going after pucks and trying to knock guys off of pucks, and that it's a very different style of play. So I'm willing to give Skjei a little bit more time here to, kind of adjust to that. I think the issue with the high danger chances and things like that, it's not just the defensemen, it's also the defensive play of the forwards, to be honest with you. I think it's been a lot of sort of miscues and miscommunications, like I said, not playing well as a 5-man unit. That's led to a lot of that, kind of those defensive breakdowns. Seems like they're giving up a lot of odd man rushes, a lot of breakaways. And again, I think that falls on the forwards just as much as the defensemen. With the addition of Brady Skjei, it's a little difficult because you're trying to figure out where he fits, because you don't want to, like, you have if we start in the middle, your second pairing of Jeremy Lauzon and Alex Carrier, they play so well together. You can't really justify splitting those guys up. And then you have Roman Josi on your top pairing, usually plays with Dante Fabro, but Josi, he's a left shot defenseman, but he doesn't play aside. He plays everywhere. So like you can easily shift him. And then you have the third pairing, which right now is Mark Delgaizo and Luke Schenn. And for a while, though, it was Skjei and Schenn on that third pairing. And you think, okay, well, you don't want to pay a guy $7 million a year to bury him on your third pairing. Quite frankly, babysitting Luke Schenn, who isn't quite fast enough for this system that Brunette likes to play. So they've been trying Skjei up top with Josi these last couple games. And it's been a little bit of growing pains, I think. Again, it's going to take reps. It's going to take more opportunities to, get that communication down.
Yeah, which Carolina's style of play is very similar to Florida's there. So a lot requires when it comes to just getting used to what Andrew Brunette is trying to put together. I mean, for Lauzon and Carey, I'm seeing that just under 150 minutes together. The Josi Fabro, their expected goals percentage is just over 55. So they were protecting the house pretty well, as well as creating their offensive chances while they were. So it's still a little bit of that balancing act for each of the pairs there for the lineup. But we're going to transition over to segment number 3, where we're going to discuss Barry Trotz's comments from a few days ago, and along with the schedule for the Nashville Predators coming up in the month of November. We're going to discuss that more next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Indeed. And when you need to hire, you need Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 150 million global listeners, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. And Indeed doesn't just help you hire faster. 93% of employers agree Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites, according to a recent Indeed survey. And listeners of the show will get $75 sponsored job credit to get your job more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. Go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. Third and final segment here on this Thursday, November 7th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day here on a Thursday, here with Emma Lingan of the Hockey News, host of the Wraparound and co-host of Locked On Panthers. And a little bit of Panther news here. The Panthers now are mostly healthy now that Jonah Gadjevich was in practice for the Panthers on Wednesday. So now they even have their extra forward there. So that is great news for the Florida Panthers, as they are one step close, as they are mostly healthy going into tonight's game between the Florida Panthers and the Nashville Predators from Amerant Bank Arena. And Emma, I don't know where Barry Trotz is going with this comment whenever he says if things don't get started, I'm going to have to start the rebuilding plan. And I'm paraphrasing that quote there for him, but he did say that on the radio station 102.5, the game there. But when I think of that comment, and I also think of where the roster stands as far as not a lot of expiring contracts, some trade protections there for the roster. And also, I think Elliot Friedman spoke about it on 32 Thoughts, is the fact that Barry Trotz was recently behind the bench. I don't think he's going to quickly pull the plug on someone like Bruno when you're still putting things together. So what do you make of that comment when he said that publicly on the radio?
Well, I think the thing with Barry that, I mean, I've just learned this from covering him for the last few seasons. He is a lot more open and honest with his thought processes than a lot of NHL GMs are. So if you think about that comment in context, it's really not that surprising. I think if there are certain other GMs who maybe hold things a little closer to the vest, and if they would say something like that, it would be a huge story. Barry is just very open. He's very honest. His press conferences are always very lengthy because he always has a lot to say. And he, which is refreshing, frankly, as someone who covers him. He's always giving you good stuff, but he is very open with his thought processes. And so I think sometimes people hear what they want to hear, or they interpret something that's not there, and they hear what he said, which is, if things don't start turning around, then we'll kick off the rebuild plan. And people heard that and thought, oh my God, he's rebuilding right now. And it's like, no, that's not what he said. Because if you look at, half your guys have no trade clauses, and you brought in these guys to make a run at it now, and they're not going to rebuild right away. He is saying, I think two things. Number one, I think he is just frankly speaking his train of thought out loud, where he's, like any responsible GM, he's saying, look, winning is still the priority. Winning now is still the priority, but we also acknowledge that there are other options on the table. And down the line, this doesn't mean like next week. It just means several years down the line, probably. If this is not working, then we start the rebuild, because that is my job as a general manager to do that. And so I think that that's all he's saying. But then I think, kind of another element of it is kind of this makes it sound, more crafty and, devious than it's supposed to, but it's almost like a little bit of psychological manipulation, kind of talking to the players through the media. Because, I mean, you see coaches do this all the time. And like you said, Barry Trotz is, he's a coach by nature. I know like Nick Saban would do it all the time with Alabama football, and, kind of talking to the players through the media. And Barry Trotz said, hey, we've got these guys down in Milwaukee. We have some really talented young players. We've got Fedor Svechkov, who could be up here by Christmas. And, we will bring them up if we think that they're going to give us the best chance to win. So that's kind of lighting a fire under the players to be like, okay, there's someone, if you're not going to step up and produce, there is someone waiting in the wing who will. And I think that we saw a little bit of that against the Capitals last night. Again, the Predators ended up losing the game, but the effort was there. It was a remarkably improved effort. So it seems like maybe they're starting to get that message a little bit. And then as far as Brunette and whether his seat is hot, absolutely not. It's ice cold. I think that, if you remember, Barry Trotz handpicked Andrew Brunette, brought him in while he still had John Hines under contract. He didn't need to go hire a coach. But he did. And so he's going to give, and we have to, I think, give Andrew Brunette benefit of the doubt here, because we saw what he did with this team last year, and he has shown a proven ability to get something out of this team and turn them around after a tough start. Now, you don't want the tough starts to become a pattern, because that's not great either. But he's shown that he can get the most out of his players and, kind of pull them into the fight. And he's also, again, He was a Jack Adams finalist last year. He's not losing his job. He's not losing his job anytime soon.
Yeah, you also don't want a canceled show to be part of a run as well for them there. So going into this matchup tonight, Preds desperation versus Panthers ability to have a little room for error. 9 of their next 12 will be at home, but also the state of the division for the Central, which the Panthers have faced their fair share of Central Division opponents already in this young season. They'll also get the Winnipeg Jets twice in the next few weeks there, and the Chicago Blackhawks. So just when you think about the division for the Predators, I mean, Colorado's they're limping a little bit, but they still have their top end talent. Minnesota is definitely improved. Winnipeg with Scott Arniel, which Scott Arniel had a few games coach when Rick Bowness was sick. Wife was sick, and he was taking care of her. But also with the Nashville Predators, I mean, a lot of home games to start, and they didn't really take advantage of the home heavy schedule for them. And now it only gets a little bit more difficult for them. I mean, the Central Division teams have the roughest of travel schedules all throughout the NHL with the amount of time zones they're in. But after this, one home game, then to the Mountain Time Zone for 3 against Colorado, Edmonton, and Calgary, and then to the Pacific Northwest, and then back home. I mean, this could possibly decide a lot of things very early on. But at the same time, Nashville, despite buying a lot of these players, still quite a lot of cap space at their disposal if they want to make something happen even now ahead of time in order to still bolster something. I'm not saying it has to happen, but still, Barry Trotz has options here.
He does, yeah. And regarding the schedule, I mean, it's all relative, right? If they had a great start to the season, then I think going on the road this much coming up here would be a bad thing, or it would be looked at as a bad thing. Quite frankly, I think that getting on the road is going to be a really good thing for this team because, if you think about it, when you're losing, if you're on the road, you want to go home. But if you're losing at home, you want to get on the road. So I think that there's so much to be said for, getting on the road, getting away from the building where it's kind of, you go into a road arena and no one is expecting anything of you. You don't have to answer for anything. It's not like you're coming back after just losing there and you can sense, the building is upset with you or expecting something from you. It's just you go and you play your game and then you leave as soon as it's over. And I think that getting that for an extended period of time here in November is going to be a really good thing for this team.
No doubt. And I'm seeing I see 7 road games in the next few weeks and 4 home games. So definitely going to be a big stretch as they have 3 sets of back-to-backs for the remainder of the month. So that is definitely you can't make the playoffs in November, but you could definitely find your way out there very, very early. So it's going to be this is going to be possibly a stretch for Nashville that could really we could really see what direction they go into to the rest of the season. But Emma, I want to thank you so much for joining me on this edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, previewing tonight's game between the Florida Panthers and the Nashville Predators, as the Predators will be on a second end of a back-to-back going from DC to South Florida. Tell everybody where they can find you and your work online.
Thank you again for having me. You can find me on social media at Emma_Lingan. You can also find me over on the Locked On Predators podcast, wherever you get your podcasts, and you can find my work on the Hockey News.
Awesome. Thank you so much and hope to see you soon. And if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast to be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Don't forget to also subscribe to the other shows on the Locked On NHL network, including Locked On NHL, Locked On Fantasy Hockey, Flip Livingstone and Stu Roden, and Locked On NHL Prospects. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. So I'm Armando Velez with Emma Lingan, and you've been listening to Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day.